Manhattan late at night. The streets glowed with neon lights, limousines lined up in front of a toile, a French restaurant reserved only for the most powerful. Adrian Blackwood, 40 years old and CEO of Blackwood Capital, adjusted his cuff to reveal a gleaming Rolex. At his side, Sienna Moore, the famed model with her regal beauty, clung to his arm affectionately. As the two crossed the grand lobby, they drew glances of admiration mixed with envy from other diners. Adrian was used to it. He always chose places like this, lavish, extravagant, to display his success. Amid the hazy strains of jazz, chandeliers shimmered with crystal light. A host led them to a table in the center, the kind of spot reserved for people who demanded to be seen. Sienna leaned in, whispering with pride, "Perfect. Just your style." Adrian smiled, a cool, precise smile, as tailored as his suit. And then, the glittering facade shattered in an instant. At the far end of the room, in a plain server's uniform, stood Lila Hayes, Adrian's ex-wife. She carried a tray of dishes, her hair tied back, her face touched with fatigue, yet lit by a fierce resilience. And beneath her apron, her belly was unmistakably swollen. Adrian froze. For a moment, the entire room seemed to fall silent. His grip tightened around his glass, a surge of panic threatening the icy composure he wore like armor. His heart pounded violently, yet his face remained the mask of a controlled CEO. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. Lila faltered, nearly dropping the tray, before she steadied herself and turned away, as though Adrian were nothing more than a stranger. That deliberate dismissal struck him harder than any words could. Sienna noticed nothing, too busy chattering about the upcoming charity gala and their Vogue photo shoot. Adrian nodded absently, but her words dissolved into static. The luxury surrounding him blurred until only Lila, and that unmistakable pregnancy, remained in focus. Abruptly, he rose from his seat, adjusting his tie. "I'll just step away for a moment." Sienna, lost in her reflection in a silver compact, waved him off without a glance. But Adrian's path didn't lead to the restroom. Instead, he slipped into the dimly lit service corridor, his stride quickening, decisive, because he knew he couldn't let this go unanswered. Adrian strode quickly through the service corridor. The light here was dim, stripped of the glittering luxury of the main dining hall. Only the smell of food, the clatter of dishes, and the hurried footsteps of staff filled the air. Amid that chaos, he spotted Lila setting a tray down on the counter. Her back was to him, yet she seemed to sense the sharp gaze burning into her. "Lila!" Adrian's voice cut through the noise. Low, steady, commanding. She froze. Her shoulders trembled for a fraction of a second, but just as quickly, she steadied herself. Turning around, she hugged the serving tray to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was cool, distant, as if they had never been husband and wife. Adrian narrowed his eyes and took a step closer, gaze locked on her stomach, the undeniable curve he couldn't tear his eyes away from. "Don't call me like I'm a stranger. Tell me, that child." His voice rasped, a mix of fury and disbelief. "It's mine, isn't it?" The air thickened. The sounds of the kitchen faded into nothing. Lila tightened her grip on the tray, lifting her chin with pride and defiance. "What you choose to believe is your concern, Adrian. But my condition has nothing to do with you anymore." His jaw clenched. He forced his voice low, struggling to contain the storm inside. "Don't play this game with me. I have the right to know, right?" Lila gave a bitter laugh, sharp as glass. "You once treated fatherhood like a burden, something that stood in the way of your empire. And now you dare speak of rights?" The words cut him to the bone. Adrian parted his lips to respond, but she had already turned away, her voice firm, final. "This is not the place for this conversation." She walked off, apron swaying behind her, leaving Adrian alone in the dim corridor. His chest heaved, fists clenched, mind spinning with questions he could no longer ignore. One thing, however, was certain. The secret of that child would not be left unresolved. And if it was truly his, Adrian Blackwood would never accept being erased from its life. The back door of the restaurant closed, leaving Adrian frozen in the dim hallway. For the first time in years, the man who prided himself on control felt utterly unbalanced. He returned to his Manhattan penthouse on the top floor, but the familiar luxury now felt suffocating. Golden light reflected off the glass of whiskey in his hand, a drink that once symbolized power and control. Yet as the amber liquid swirled under the light, all he saw was emptiness. Adrian stepped out onto the balcony, staring down at the rush of cars below. For years, this city had been in the palm of his hand, deals, numbers, connections. But tonight, with a single glance from Lila, the fortress he had built his entire life had begun to crack. That child, was it his blood? The question wrapped around his mind like a tightening vice, driving him to drain his glass and still find no answers. Meanwhile, in another world entirely, Lila returned to her modest apartment in Queens. The room was barely lit by an old yellow lamp. She set her tray down on the table, pulled off her worn apron, and sank into the sagging sofa. Her body ached after a long shift, but when her hand settled over her belly, a faint smile crossed her lips. The baby kicked, a small signal of life, a reminder that she was not alone. Lila closed her eyes. For a moment, the exhaustion melted away. She remembered Adrian's gaze from earlier, confusion, anger, and helplessness colliding in his eyes. But instead of faltering, she pressed her palm firmly against her stomach and whispered to herself, "I will protect you." Even if I have to stand against the entire world in Manhattan, a man surrounded by glittering wealth stood hollow. In Queens, a woman in poverty found her strength in the fragile heartbeat within her. Two worlds in contrast, two hearts in conflict, yet bound by the same haunting truth. The past had never truly let them go. In her small apartment in Queens, as Lila's hand gently rested on her pregnant belly, old memories surged back unbidden. Back then, the penthouse she once shared with Adrian was always filled with the glitter of crystal chandeliers and the scent of fine French wine shimmering on the dining table. But beneath all that luxury lay a suffocating emptiness. She remembered vividly one rare evening when they actually sat down to dinner together. Lila, in a simple dress, her eyes filled with hope, spoke softly. "Adrian, I think it's time we had a real family. A child would give our lives meaning." The silver fork in Adrian's hand froze midair. Surprise flickered across his eyes, then quickly hardened into something cold, almost devoid of feeling. He set down his glass, his voice even and sharp as a blade. "Lila, you know Blackwood Capital is at a decisive stage. A child right now is nothing but a distraction, something that could ruin everything. I cannot sacrifice my career for a baby." In that instant, Lila's heart felt crushed. Her smile vanished, replaced by a hollow ache. The invisible distance between them became clearer than ever. For years that followed, Adrian buried himself in endless meetings, overnight flights to financial capitals, banned billion-dollar deals. Whenever Lila tried to talk, he responded with silence, or with clipped, dismissive answers. The lavish home turned into nothing more than a hotel suite, a place he stopped by to change clothes and sleep for a few hours, while she quietly cleaned, waited, and hoped. But the longer she waited, the emptier it became. And then came the day Lila discovered she was pregnant. Instead of joy, a wave of fear swept through her. She knew Adrian would never see it as a gift, only as another obstacle. And as she expected when she brought it up again, his eyes held only that same cold refusal. That night, Lila cried for hours, but no one was there to see. She looked into the mirror and saw a woman reduced to nothing but a shadow in her husband's life. And in a decision that was both painful and defiant, she chose to leave, carrying within her the small, unwelcome life that she vowed to protect. On the other side of the city, Adrian never truly realized what he had lost. To him, the silence and the divorce papers were nothing more than a neat, clinical ending to a relationship that no longer fit. But for Lila, it was the price of preserving her dignity and safeguarding the child in her womb. And now when fate brought them face to face again in that glittering Manhattan restaurant, the truth, thought long buried, rose up once more, cutting deep into wounds that had never healed. That night, inside his penthouse overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, Adrian Blackwood stood frozen before the massive glass wall. Instead of pride at the city's dazzling lights, He felt only an immense emptiness in his chest. The image of Lila, her pregnant belly beneath a worn apron, haunted him. A woman who had once shared his life, now forced to carry a child alone in hardship. Adrian had never known the feeling of helplessness, but now it gnawed at him with every second. His hand trembled as he gripped the whiskey glass, then slammed it down onto the table. He couldn't take it anymore. He called a private investigation firm. His voice was cold, though beneath it lurked a restlessness even he didn't recognize. I need everything on Lila Hayes. Her residence, her work, her financial status. Everything. Days later, a report lay on his desk. Adrian flipped through the pages, his eyes growing darker with each line. The brutal truth lay bare. Lila had not taken a single cent from the divorce. She refused every job offer connected to Blackwood Capital, even the lucrative ones. Every dollar she earned went toward preparing for her child. On the table was a grainy photo. Lila hurrying down a street in Queens, her face tired but her gaze unyielding. Adrian's grip on the file tightened. This was no longer the image of a fragile woman in need of protection. This was a mother fighting against the world itself to shield her unborn child. For the first time in his life, Adrian felt a sharp pain born of his own coldness. He had thought Lila left because she was weak. But no, she had left to preserve her dignity, to protect the child from a father who wasn't ready. That regret hardened into resolve. He swore to himself, if that child is mine, I will not let it grow up believing its father never wanted it. I will reclaim my right as a father, at any cost. In that moment, the ambition that had always filled Adrian's eyes was no longer fixed on billion-dollar deals. Instead, it burned toward a single goal: Lila and the child. A week later, Adrian returned to the restaurant where he had first seen Lila again. This time, he didn't take the spotlight seat at the center. Instead, he chose a shadowed corner, no longer the cold CEO flaunting his wealth, but a restless man, trying to find his place in the life of a woman who had once left him. His eyes followed Lila's every movement, each time she bent to serve a table, each time her hand instinctively brushed her belly to feel the fragile life growing inside. Her quiet resilience cut him with equal parts sorrow and fury. But tonight, Adrian wasn't the only one watching her. Another man stepped forward, steadying the heavy tray in Lila's hands. He was neatly dressed, nothing ostentatious, just a crisp white shirt, a well-set tie, and calm, kind eyes. Lila, you don't have to push yourself. I'll have someone else handle this. His voice was deep, warm, not an order, but genuine concern. Lila hesitated, then looked up at him with a faint smile. I'm fine, Julian. I'm used to it, Julian Scott, the restaurant manager. Not just her superior, but clearly someone who shielded her when the world pressed too hard. The look in his eyes carried a gentleness Adrian had never once offered her. From the hidden table across the room, Adrian's fist tightened, his chest constricted. He couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. The way Julian leaned in, the way Lila allowed herself the smallest smile, jealousy roared through Adrian like fire. Who was Julian to Lila? Just her boss? Or the man filling the space Adrian had left empty? The question pierced him like a blade. In Adrian's eyes, Julian was more than a manager. He was everything Adrian had failed to be: patient, attentive, present, not needing power or wealth to stand by her. As Lila walked away, Julian's hand lingered briefly on her shoulder, a silent encouragement. From across the room, the sight struck Adrian like a slap across his pride. That night, back in his cold, empty penthouse, Adrian stared at his own reflection in the mirror. And for the first time, he admitted to himself, unless he changed, Lila already had a better choice than him: Julian. The anger Adrian had suppressed for so long finally boiled over. One evening, he returned to the restaurant. This time, he didn't hide in the shadows. He sat openly, his cold eyes never leaving Lila. When her shift ended, Lila stepped out the back door, clutching a thin coat against the unusually bitter New York night. Adrian was already there, leaning against the damp brick wall, his gaze sharp as steel. "We need to talk." His voice was low, each word ground out like stone. Lila froze, inhaling deeply, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "I have nothing left to say to you, Adrian." He took a step closer, his voice tight with restrained fury. Stop pretending. This child, it's mine, isn't it? Silence closed in around them. The distant roar of traffic only sharpened the tension. Lila lifted her chin, eyes proud but defensive. You're mistaken. This isn't your concern. Her answer struck like a spark to a powder keg. Adrian's fist clenched, his voice rising, nearly a roar though he struggled to contain it. I have a right to know. If this child is mine, you cannot rob me of that chance. Being a father isn't some privilege you can grant or deny. It's my right. Lila shuddered, but her gaze hardened, slicing through his anger. No, Adrian. Fatherhood isn't about power. It's about presence. And you were never there. The words cut deeper than any blade. Adrian stood frozen, lips parting, but no words escaping. And in that charged silence, Julian appeared. Emerging from the kitchen door, he caught sight of the standoff and immediately strode toward them. Is there a problem here? Julian asked, calm but watchful. Adrian turned sharply, jealousy burning in his eyes. And who the hell are you to interfere? Julian didn't flinch. I'm someone who cares about her safety. That's all. The air thickened, crackling with hostility. Adrian wanted to strike, to lash out, but restrained himself. He realized with bitter clarity, Julian didn't need power or wealth to stand beside Lila, and that truth terrified him. Blinded by rage, Adrian let slip the secret he'd uncovered after digging into the past. You think I don't know? You saw doctors back when we were still married. You wanted a child even then, but I never asked, never listened. Lila's breath caught. Her eyes shimmered, a storm of fury and sorrow. Yes, I wanted it. I longed for a family. But to you, it was nothing but a burden. You never understood me, Adrian. And now, when I finally have what I've dreamed of, you show up demanding ownership. Julian stepped forward, placing a steadying hand behind Lila, protective, resolute. Adrian watched the scene, and it felt as though the entire world had turned against him. For the first time, a question echoed in his mind, heavy and unrelenting. Was I the one who lost everything from the very beginning? That night, the cold wind from the Hudson swept through the narrow streets of Queens. In her small apartment, Lila returned from a grueling shift. Exhausted, she collapsed onto the worn-out sofa, one hand clutching her heavy belly. The baby kicked harder than usual, and a sudden pain tightened across her lower abdomen, forcing a faint cry from her lips. At first, Lila tried to endure it, telling herself it was just another contraction. But the next wave came faster, sharper, sweat beading on her forehead. Her neighbor, Jenna, a middle-aged woman from next door, heard the noise and rushed in. Seeing Lila curled up, breath shallow and ragged, Jenna panicked. Oh my God, Lila! You need a hospital now. The baby's not due yet. Lila shook her head, tears brimming. I don't want to call anyone. But Jenna did what had to be done. She rummaged through her contacts, finding the number Lila had reluctantly shared. Adrian. 15 minutes later, the door burst open. Adrian charged in, his face pale, unlike anything she'd ever seen. He was no longer the polished CEO in a flawless suit, but a desperate man, breath quick and uneven. Lila, he shouted, rushing forward. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. Her body trembled against his chest, sweat soaking his collar. Through clenched teeth, she gasped, Adrian, don't. I can handle this myself. Shut up. I won't leave you alone again. His voice cracked. Part command, part vow. The hospital corridor glared under fluorescent light, white tiles echoing with hurried footsteps. Doctors and nurses swarmed, placing Lila on a gurney and rushing her into the delivery room. Adrian followed, but was stopped at the door. In that instant, time froze. Adrian pressed his hand against the glass, listening to her cries from within. Each scream ripped through him, cutting deeper than any defeat he had ever faced in boardrooms or battles of power. He realized, here at the threshold of life and death, he had no control, no power, only helplessness. Inside, Lila screamed through the pain, sweat, and tears streaming down. The doctor urged her on. Push, Lila. Deep breath. Push. Adrian bit down hard, eyes burning red, whispering against the cold glass. You're not alone. I'm right here. And then, the first cry pierced the air, small, fragile, yet thunderous enough to shatter every wall, every shadow of doubt. Adrian dropped to his knees, his hands trembling against the door. Tears spilled down his face, not from rage or loss, but from something far greater, life itself. The door swung open. A nurse stepped out, carrying a swaddled infant, her voice ringing clear. Mother and baby are safe. A boy, slightly premature, but stable. Adrian staggered forward, each step heavy yet electrified with awe. As he looked down at the tiny boy, the infant stirred, fists curling as though reaching for the world. In that moment, Adrian Blackwood, the cold CEO, the man who once worshipped only power, finally understood. Fatherhood was never about control. It was about sacrifice. It was about being there. Early morning at the hospital, sunlight filtered through the window panes, casting a soft glow into the recovery room. Lila lay in bed, exhausted but calmer after the ordeal. Beside her, Noah, tiny, fragile, still pink and new, slept soundly in his crib. Adrian sat nearby, silent, his gaze fixed on the child. The power suit was gone. Instead, he wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled. There was no trace of the cold CEO of Blackwood Capital, only a man, his eyes trembling with awe, as he looked at the little life before him. When Lila stirred, she caught sight of him clumsily changing Noah's diaper. He fumbled so badly he nearly dropped the wipe, his face twisted in concentration as if negotiating the toughest deal of his life. But instead of scoffing, Lila stayed quiet, watching. Because in those awkward gestures, she saw something rare: determination. Adrian was truly trying to learn, trying to stay, trying to be a father. He looked up and met her gaze. Silence stretched for a moment, then his voice came low and rough, worn from a sleepless night. I've missed too much already, but I won't miss this boy. Lila turned her face away, fingers clutching the blanket. Her heart was still guarded, the old wounds not yet healed. But deep down, she felt the difference. Adrian was no longer the man who barked orders, the husband who dismissed family as an inconvenience. He was here, present, something she had begged for in their marriage but never received. In the days that followed, the change only deepened. Adrian rearranged his schedule, cut back on late-night meetings, and delegated more power at Blackwood Capital. The man, once obsessed with control, now spent his mornings driving Lila to her checkups, afternoons learning to prepare bottles, and evenings rocking Noah to sleep. He stumbled often. Once he spilled formula across the tiny apartment, leaving the air heavy with the sour smell of milk. Another time, he held Noah too stiffly, making the baby wail. But instead of snapping like he used to, Adrian only sighed and tried again. Lila saw it all. The wariness in her eyes hadn't vanished, but little by little, she recognized the shadow of something new. A father, a man learning, finally to love. Noah slept peacefully in Adrian's arms. Lila sat close, her gaze softening, and in that moment, the three of them formed a simple, tender picture. Worlds away from the cold, calculating empire Adrian once ruled. Late afternoon. Central Park was bathed in golden light as the sun sank low, its last rays stretching across the grass, painting the world in warmth tinged with melancholy. Adrian sat on a bench, Noah sleeping peacefully in his arms. Gone was the tailored suit. He wore only a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up. His eyes were softer than ever, so different from the cold, distant man Lila once knew. Beside him, Lila sat quietly, her hair loose around her face. There was still a trace of caution in her expression, but her gaze was no longer entirely guarded. She looked at Noah, then glanced at Adrian, silence hanging for a few seconds before she finally spoke. I believe in change, Adrian, but it takes time. The words were gentle, yet drew an invisible line. They weren't full forgiveness, nor outright rejection. They marked the fragile space between a broken past and an uncertain future. Adrian gave a small nod, his lips trembling as he whispered, "You and our son, you're everything to me." Lila clutched her coat tighter, not answering right away, but her eyes softened, still burdened with pain, yet holding a flicker of hope. The three of them sat together beneath the fading sun. Leaves rustled overhead, children's laughter drifted faintly in the distance, weaving into the heavy silence between them. It wasn't a happily ever after, not yet, but it was something far more precious, an opportunity. An opportunity for Adrian to learn how to make amends, an opportunity for Lila to find the courage to trust again, and above all, an opportunity for Noah, the innocent child, to grow up surrounded by love, late but genuine. Lessons learned: money and power can never replace presence and love. A family doesn't need perfection. It needs sincerity and the courage to face emotions honestly. Even if change comes late, when it comes from the heart, it still carries the power to heal and redeem.